Good evening, and welcome to the latest installment of Critics and Cars Getting Home. And we've just left the latest screening of Beau is Afraid, the latest film by Ari Aster, the director of Hereditary and Midsummer, starring Joaquin Phoenix.
That's right.
And it's a little late at night because it's 3 hours long, and we went in at 7:40, and we have just survived the world's most expensive therapy session.
That's right, and I would say 3 hours too long.
3 hours, okay.
Maybe not quite.
So not bearing the lead on this one is how you felt about it, are you?
Yeah. So my huge dilemma here is it's not a bad film. There aren't bad performances. It's not even really badly scripted. I found it unenjoyable and yet engrossing. But mainly unenjoyable.
And occasionally gross.
Yeah.
I think, so the films just to summarize it very quickly, Joaquin Phoenix is a very anxious guy named Beau who has a lot of mother issues and is supposed to fly home to see his mom, and difficulties ensue.
It's a quest narrative.
It's a quest narrative of sorts,
something of a road movie, kind of. You know, to the extent that he goes on a journey and he interacts with a miscellany of a variety of characters.
Yeah, a picaresque sort of Easy Rider sort of thing. But the movies I thought of were more things like Under the Silver Lake, Synecdoche, New York, Antichrist, Repulsion.
I thought Von Trier and Lynch.
Yeah. Haneke at points. There's a Funny Games reference at one point. I won't spoil it. But
we'll try not to really spoiler any of it.
We'll just say that there's been a lot of confusion as to what his new film was going to be, because it was originally claimed to be a comedy film. Then there was talk about it being a horror film. And I was sort of reminded of how Synecdoche, New York actually started by Spike Jonze trying to make a horror film with Charlie Kaufman. And Charlie Kaufman couldn't think of anything more horrific than getting old. Yeah. And Beau is Afraid is kind of like, if you start making a horror movie, you can't think of anything more horrifying than your mom thinking that you failed her. But then making it into a comedy.
Well,
It starts funny, and there's things that are intended to be funny that land with less and less.
It's extremely black humor, regardless. And I think you have to have a much lighter spirit than me to find any of the very beginning. I mean, look, it's like I was going to say it's like a 3-act story, a 3-act Greek tragedy, and for a moment there, Greek and oh my God, Act 1 is grim. It sets the scene for grimness. Yeah. Then Act 2, you think, oh, thank heavens, there's going to be a bit of respite or a little bit of optimism or hope. But of course, this is Ari Aster, so you're not really. Don't get settled for too long. And then Act 3 is just grim and confusing, etc., etc. But the beginning of it, I thought, was so horrible. The setting of the city in which Beau lives, which we can only assume is New York, but is just grim and gritty and horrible, reminded me of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Certainly the Garden of Earthly Delights or something like that. Yeah,
the one where like the stomach is exposed on a giant person.
That's right, with people part animal, kind of like the way you might think of hell if you believe in hell, or even if you don't believe in hell but you've studied art history.
I mean, that was the part that I found a few things that were quite funny, because it seemed like that overly exaggerated thing of what's the worst thing that happens if you live downtown, and it's like, every early 80s New York movie on a fever dream. True. Worst thing of the body and the thing.
I thought to myself, is this going to be one big allegory of the ills of humanity?
Nah, it's just a bunch of stuff.
It is just a bunch of stuff, but also it is
and mommy issues.
It is. It's about psychological trauma and everything, but it gets very long-winded, very laboured, and
if you thought he exhausted mommy issues in Hereditary, wait till he exhausts you here with them.
And the thing is you may know that I have not seen Hereditary, and famously between us, in lieu of watching it, I read the Wikipedia plot summary, which was great because it means that I really don't have any of the horrible images in my head, but I know some key things from which I can say there are thematic, he definitely revisits certain, what we now can call Asterian tropes. But I have seen Midsummer, And Midsummer, I thought, was very challenging and very engrossing, but I thought that Florence Pugh was just so beguiling in that, regardless. Now, look, I'm a massive Joaquin Phoenix fan. I think he's a terrific actor, but his character isn't beguiling in this.
Well, his character, it's one of those very frustrating things where you have a very passive lead character who's being passive, who's being driven through it at more than driving for 3 hours, and it's just sort of and occasionally
and a series of things happen to him. You're absolutely right. He has no agency in it whatsoever, which becomes a bit of a plot point. But that's awful to watch, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it just gets put upon white guy. It's something we've seen a lot. I mean, I don't know that the race is particularly relevant, but it just
middle class white guy.
And there's sort of some retrospective, like, kind of explanation for why he's how he is, but you still have to watch him for 3 hours just being super passive and confused and not asking the basic questions that any of us in those situations would ask.
Because and that's where the Lynchian stuff comes in. If people aren't behaving the way that you would like or expect them to, it's because you're kind of watching like a 90s Lynch film.
Yeah, and
there are peculiarities that aren't spoken about by the other people in the film. So you just sort of go, okay, this is just the world of the film, and I just have to accept.
But it even seems though at points that there's flights of fantasy within the world of the film.
Yeah.
And that's the really, but also that it's not all in his head.
No.
But that's I think part of it is it's quite frustratingly muddled in terms of actually
incohesive, isn't it? I didn't think it was incoherent at all. Like, it's completely coherent for me, but it was incohesive. And I found that, there are some films, interestingly, actually, probably one of the most charming bits in it, which still came at a time when I was just longing for the whole thing to be over, is a period that is animated in quite an interesting, almost a lot. Is it Lottie Reinhardt? Am I thinking?
Lottie Reininger.
Could be kind of way, like quite neat and kind of almost Wes Anderson-y. And so you might suspend your disbelief and go, oh, okay, this film is messing with a whole lot of different styles and genres and whatnot, and can be quite charming in that way, but it doesn't have Wes Anderson's sharp kind of consistency and vision in a way.
It does steal Roy Anderson at the end, who I don't think you've seen much of, but the last shot is very Roy Anderson. I think the movie I actually started thinking about less because of the movie itself and more because what it's about is the Aristocrats. Are you familiar with the Aristocrats?
Are you talking about the
comedian documentary, which basically it's just like the whole point of it is these people tell this long, filthy joke, and then at the end of it it's like, what's the name of this act? The Aristocrats. And it's just this kind of, well, that was a really self-indulgent weird thing that why
amounting to nothing.
Yeah, it kind of is. And but at the same time, I think there will be people who love it. I've looked on Letterboxd. I know there's people who love it, and I mean there's people who love Antichrist. There's people who love Under the Silver Lake, and it's ambitious. It's not like anything else you'll see this year. It's not like anything else you'll see most years. And
for my part, I find it. I am going to find it incredibly difficult to recommend to anybody.
Yeah, I almost think there's no point of reviewing it for a listener audience except to say.
Well, I mean, it'll be a sort of more of a cautionary thing, and it will be. Look, hey, you might think Joaquin Phoenix, but I mean, it's to me his character in this is like almost like the unagentic version of his Joker character in a way. It's got that same sad / pathetic, although I use that word advisedly, kind of role. So it ain't uplifting or anything like that. but also
Yeah.
it doesn't have the charm and the cohesiveness of Midsommar. It doesn't have the horror of Hereditary, which I haven't seen, but I understand. You know, it doesn't have shock moments and jump scares, and
It has a couple, but yeah.
not in the classic,
Not
not
in-
in the
yeah.
classic sense at all. If it's a horror at all, as I keep saying, it's a Lynchian or a psychological horror. And I thought to myself at one part, this isn't a spoiler because you know weird stuff happens. I thought to myself, is it going to turn out that this is all his psychosis? In which case, what a cop-out. Or is it not? In which case, what the is happening? You know?
Yeah.
If it isn't, then what is this? You know?
I feel like I'm stealing this from somebody on Letterboxd, but I was thinking also of a friend who once said he wanted to make a movie that would just embody the experience of what anxiety was like. And I almost feel like that was like, I'm just going to make a movie that's an adaptation of an emotion.
Actually, that
And-
is quite an interesting take on it. Because at the very
I think it's the most
beginning-
successful at that way.
Sure. At the very beginning, I thought this is just relentlessly tense, not in a
Yeah.
thriller/horror way. It's tense in a psychological.
Oh,
or
that's right.
emotional
Mother
way.
was the other film I thought of.
Yeah, you see,
but
and
that
yet-
was a much more cohesive.
Right, and I could
and half the
totally-
length.
I could handle Darren
Yeah.
Aronofsky's Mother. You mean
Yeah,
Mother?
that's the one. Yes, Mother exclamation point,
Yeah.
not Mother Bong Joon-ho.
With Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't know, like, I would very happily not have seen this. Like, I loved Joker, I loved his performance in Joker, and even though Joker was very, very disturbing, and ironically, the ending scenes of Joker feel to me like the opening scenes of this film.
True, yeah.
In terms of the setting and everything. So even though there was a lot to kind of dislike, or, you know, dislike emotionally about Joker, totally glad I saw it, would see it again, yada, yada, yada. This, I could do without this.
Do you mean from a aesthetic enjoyment perspective or the emotional heft of it?
All of it.
Right. Okay. Well, we probably don't need to continue this till we got home because I think we've got to our point. So,
Yes.
in conclusion,
Don't go.
5 stars.
Are you serious?
No, God, no.
Oh.
No, I think 2 stars. I mean, yeah, it's not a recommendation, but but at the same time, if there's enough that's piqued your interest, there are passages that are fascinating. There's stuff, but don't say we didn't warn you.
Yeah.
Till next time.